For over 300 years, European royal families engaged in widespread inbreeding, a practice driven by a relentless desire to concentrate wealth and power within their lineage. This strategic, yet ultimately devastating, marital tradition meant that kings, queens, and emperors frequently married their first or second cousins, severely limiting their genetic diversity. The consequences were catastrophic. Rather than safeguarding their dynasties, this obsession with pure bloodlines led to an array of disturbing genetic conditions and deformities. We're talking about monarchs with grotesque facial deformities, individuals so frail they bled to death from minor cuts, and rulers whose mental faculties were so impaired they could barely function. These were not mere medical curiosities. They were genetic disasters that deeply impacted the lives of those afflicted and, crucially, the course of European history. These severe hereditary issues weakened royal houses, fueled political instability, and in some cases, directly contributed to the downfall of empires, fundamentally reshaping the continent's future. The Romanov catastrophe vividly illustrates how a single genetic condition, hemophilia, could become a pivotal force in the collapse of a vast empire. At the heart of this tragedy was Tsarevich Alexei Romanov, born in 1904, the long-awaited male heir to the Russian throne. Within months of his birth, the joyous celebration turned into a nightmare. Alexei had inherited hemophilia B from his great-grandmother, Queen Victoria, through his mother, Tsarina Alexandra. His genetic condition, marked by terrifying and excruciating bleeding episodes, immediately became Russia's most dangerous state secret. Alexei's bleeding episodes were described as medieval torture. Internal hemorrhaging would cause his joints to swell to grotesque proportions, turning his knees and elbows into agonizing balloons filled with trapped blood. The pain was so intense that his screams often echoed through the Alexander Palace, leaving his parents, Tsar Nicholas II and Tsarina Alexandra, helpless as their heir writhed in agony for days on end. The Romanov family constructed an elaborate web of lies and cover-ups around his condition. Official photographs were meticulously staged to hide bruises, public appearances were carefully choreographed, and doctors were hidden nearby with emergency supplies. Russia's future Tsar was, in essence, a medical prisoner within his own palace. It was into this desperate situation that Grigory Rasputin, a charismatic and controversial Siberian mystic, entered the lives of the Romanovs. Rasputin claimed divine healing powers, and whether through hypnosis, stress reduction, or sheer serendipity, he appeared to be the only one who could alleviate Alexei's bleeding crises. This extraordinary ability gave the Mad Monk unprecedented and insidious power over the imperial family, who ruled 150 million people. Tsar Nicholas and Tsarina Alexandra, consumed by parental desperation to save their beloved son, would have done anything for him, and Rasputin ruthlessly exploited this vulnerability. Rasputin's influence quickly extended beyond Alexei's health. He gained access to state secrets, influenced political appointments, and effectively became an unofficial, shadowy co-ruler of the Russian Empire. His scandalous behavior, his boasting of sexual conquests, and his obvious manipulation of the royal family deeply scandalized Russian society, making the monarchy appear weak, corrupt, and out of touch. The pervasive secrecy surrounding Alexei's illness prevented the public from understanding why major decisions seemed to revolve around a mysterious holy man, fostering rampant conspiracy theories and undermining public trust. During the catastrophic losses of World War I, when the Russian people desperately needed strong, credible leadership, the monarchy was seen as compromised and controlled by dark forces. When revolution finally erupted in 1917, the Romanovs faced a population that viewed them as weak rulers, no longer fit to govern. Nicholas's abdication could not save them. In July 1918, the Bolsheviks viewed the entire family, including the sickly Alexei, as a genetic threat that needed elimination. Alexei, his parents, and his 4 sisters were executed in a basement, bringing an end to 300 years of Romanov rule. The ultimate irony is that Alexei's hemophilia, a genetic condition that affects 1 in 10,000 males, could be completely treatable by modern standards. Instead, it became the medical crisis that profoundly contributed to the destruction of an empire and irrevocably changed the course of world history. The tragic story of the Bleeding Crown begins with Queen Victoria, who, despite her seemingly robust health, unknowingly carried a deadly genetic secret, the mutation for hemophilia B. As a female carrier, Victoria herself showed no symptoms of this severe blood clotting disorder, which turns minor injuries into potential death sentences. However, she possessed the devastating ability to pass the gene to her offspring, making her a biological architect of disaster for Europe's intertwined royal families. Victoria had 9 children, and through their strategic marriages, she unwittingly became the conduit for spreading this perilous gene across the continent. Her sons faced a 50% chance of inheriting the full-blown disease, while her daughters had a 50% chance of becoming silent carriers, just like their mother, capable of transmitting the curse to the next generation. This genetic time bomb was meticulously disseminated. Her daughter Alice carried the gene to the German royal houses, Beatrice introduced it to the Spanish royal family, and critically, another daughter ensured its presence within the British royal line itself. The impact of hemophilia on these unsuspecting royal families was brutal and often mystifying to the medical community of the time. Hemophilia was exceedingly rare in the general population, meaning most doctors had never encountered it. When royal princes began to suffer from uncontrollable bleeding from seemingly minor cuts, bruises, or even spontaneous internal hemorrhages, court physicians were baffled. Their medieval treatments, ironically, often worsened the condition, with practices like leeching or bloodletting accelerating the bleeding in individuals whose blood simply wouldn't clot properly. The consequences for the affected princes were horrific. They lived in constant fear of injury, often in enforced isolation, unable to participate in the physical activities expected of royal heirs. Prince Leopold, Victoria's own hemophiliac son, spent his life as a virtual prisoner within palace walls, surrounded by padding and watchful servants, terrified of any fall or knock. Accounts describe young men suffering excruciating pain as internal bleeding caused their joints to swell to grotesque proportions. Many died prematurely from what would now be considered easily treatable injuries. In an era where royal strength and continuity were paramount, royal families resorted to systematic cover-ups to conceal this crippling genetic flaw. Weakness could not be admitted. Official portraits were meticulously staged to hide bruises and swelling. Public appearances were tightly choreographed, with servants positioned to catch a prince if he stumbled. When a prince succumbed to internal bleeding, the official cause of death was often deceptively listed as a fever or a sudden illness, maintaining a facade of robust health and divine favor. This pervasive secrecy, born of dynastic pride and the fear of vulnerability, only exacerbated the challenges faced by those afflicted and contributed to the historical misinterpretations of their fates. The bleeding crown thus became a silent, yet potent, force in shaping the destiny of European monarchies. The Hapsburg Jaw, medically known as mandibular prognathism, was a defining and tragic characteristic of the Hapsburg dynasty, a direct consequence of centuries of relentless inbreeding designed to consolidate power and wealth. Its most extreme and devastating manifestation was seen in Charles II of Spain, the last Hapsburg monarch of the Spanish line, born in 1661. His life serves as a stark testament to the biological cost of such extensive genetic isolation. Charles II was the culmination of 16 generations of cousins marrying cousins, resulting in a severely debilitated individual from birth. The most prominent and crippling feature was his severe jaw deformity. His lower jaw protruded so dramatically that his teeth could not meet, making him physically incapable of chewing food. Court attendants were forced to pre-chew his meals into a pulp, a humiliating and often perilous task as he frequently choked. This fundamental inability to eat solid food highlighted his profound physical impairment. Furthermore, his oversized tongue barely fit within his distorted mouth, leading to constant drooling and an incomprehensible mumble that required court interpreters for all communication, even with his own ministers during critical state affairs. This communication barrier inevitably undermined his authority and complicated international relations. Beyond the visible deformity, Charles suffered from a litany of other, equally devastating health issues. He experienced chronic seizures that rendered him unconscious and often left him foaming at the mouth, terrifying his court and incapacitating him for periods. His immune system was so profoundly compromised that simple colds frequently brought him to the brink of death. Chronic diarrhea plagued him, leading to embarrassing incidents during public appearances and requiring constant attention from his servants. Moreover, Charles was completely impotent, failing to produce an heir in either of his two marriages despite desperate attempts by court physicians, including superstitious remedies. His mental faculties were similarly underdeveloped, never progressing beyond that of a young child. Historical records depict a king who played with toys during state meetings, threw tantrums when contradicted, and made arbitrary decisions based on personal whims rather than rational thought. Foreign diplomats reported encountering a confused monarch who giggled inappropriately during serious negotiations. The cumulative effect of Charles's profound physical and mental infirmities had a catastrophic impact on Spanish politics and ultimately led to the downfall of the Hapsburg dynasty in Spain. His inability to produce a successor created an intense succession crisis that consumed European diplomacy for decades. When Charles II finally died at the age of 38 in 1700, an autopsy revealed the shocking extent of his genetic decay, describing organs that were shriveled and diseased. His death directly triggered the War of the Spanish Succession, a bloody conflict that reshaped the map of Europe. The Hapsburg Jaw and the accompanying cascade of illnesses were not just personal tragedies. They were the self-inflicted genetic wounds that brought down one of the most powerful ruling families in European history. The moniker Mad King George, assigned to King George III of Britain, was far more than a colloquialism. It described a profound, and often literal, toxicity afflicting his mind and body. Modern medical analysis, particularly based on his detailed symptoms, strongly suggests George suffered from acute intermittent porphyria, AIP, a rare genetic disorder. Porphyria attacks were horrifyingly debilitating, manifesting as excruciating abdominal pain, often described as being stabbed from within, severe muscle weakness, and a terrifying array of neurological and psychological symptoms, including hallucinations, paranoia, and complete personality changes. A telltale sign during his severe episodes was his urine turning a deep purple or reddish color, indicating his body was indeed poisoning itself. The timing of George's attacks was disastrous for British politics and, crucially, for the burgeoning crisis with its American colonies. His first major episode in 1765 coincided directly with escalating tensions across the Atlantic. Instead of engaging in diplomatic and measured responses to colonial grievances, George was often gripped by episodes of violent rage, incoherent ramblings, and made decisions that his own ministers described as utterly irrational. During his worst attack in 1788, he became completely detached from reality, holding conversations with dead people, believing London was flooded, and even attempting to assault his own son. Court physicians resorted to brutal, medieval treatments like ice baths and straitjackets, further compounding his suffering. Here lies a disturbing and profound connection to American history. George's genetic condition may have directly influenced his notoriously hardline approach to the colonial rebellion. Porphyria attacks are known to trigger episodes of extreme stubbornness, irrationality, and an inability to compromise. When American colonists sought reasonable concessions and diplomatic solutions, they were often dealing with a king whose brain chemistry was quite literally altered by a genetic disease. The irony is deeply layered. The very same royal intermarriage intended to keep bloodlines pure had concentrated this rare metabolic disorder. This genetic isolation, meant to secure the empire, ultimately led to a king genetically incapable of rational negotiation, arguably contributing to the loss of Britain's most valuable colonies and fueling the American Revolution. George's madness was not merely a personal affliction. It was a national security crisis that fundamentally shaped the course of global events. The royal breakdown in the Portuguese monarchy offers a chilling insight into how royal inbreeding could systematically dismantle not just the body, but the very mind. Queen Maria I of Portugal, often tragically known as Mad Maria, became the most poignant example of this psychological collapse. She ascended the throne in 1777 as a capable and devout ruler, but by 1786, her mental state had deteriorated into a profound madness, her screams often echoing through the royal palace at night. Maria's psychological unraveling was systematic and deeply disturbing. She became consumed by an intense religious mania, convinced she was damned to hell and tormented by visions of demons dragging her soul into eternal torment. She would spend days praying frantically, refusing food or sleep, believing God was constantly testing her faith. Court officials described her as having lost all reason and becoming a living corpse filled with terror. This extreme form of paranoia and religious terror intensified to the point where she was completely unable to function as a ruler. She would interrupt council meetings with religious rants or sudden screaming fits, and famously refused to sign important documents, convinced they were tricks to damn her soul. Foreign ambassadors reported that the Portuguese court had devolved into a madhouse, governed by a queen who believed herself already dead. Crucially, Maria's madness was not an isolated incident. It was part of a broader pattern of mental illness that plagued the Portuguese royal family, running through their lineage like a genetic curse. Her son, Prince José, displayed signs of severe depression and paranoia, while her grandson, King Miguel, was known for his violent mood swings and irrational behavior. This pervasive mental fragility was a direct consequence of the intensive inbreeding practiced by Portuguese royalty for generations. They frequently married within their extended family, often choosing spouses from the already genetically compromised Spanish royal family. This created a dangerous feedback loop, concentrating and amplifying genes linked to severe psychological disorders across generations. The Queen's profound mental state inevitably had a devastating impact on Portugal's political stability. Declared mentally incompetent in 1799, her son João was forced to assume the role of Prince Regent. However, the damage was already done. Portugal's inability to function effectively during the critical Napoleonic Wars, combined with the undeniable genetic problems within its ruling house, significantly weakened the nation's international standing. This internal dysfunction ultimately contributed to the loss of Brazil, their most valuable colony. In 1822, the royal breakdown of the Portuguese monarchy starkly demonstrated that genetic isolation could be as destructive to a dynasty's mental fortitude as it was to its physical health, proving that mental illness could be just as catastrophic as any visible deformity. For centuries, royal inbreeding, driven by the desire for power and wealth, inflicted severe physical and mental health issues upon European monarchies. This practice led to devastating conditions like the Hapsburg Jaw and widespread hemophilia, causing immense suffering and weakening dynasties. Ultimately, the undeniable and tragic consequences of these genetic disasters forced a pragmatic shift. By the 20th century, European royalty largely abandoned their pursuit of pure bloodlines, opting instead for marriages outside immediate family circles. This crucial change ended a centuries-long era of self-inflicted genetic degradation, ushering in a healthier future for royal families.